Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Elizabeth Lotardo once again, who is a speaker and author of the great book, Leading Yourself. Elizabeth's work focuses on helping individuals and organizations unlock purpose, build resilience, and achieve sustainable success. In this episode, Elizabeth is going to explore for us the powerful role of consistency over intensity in achieving goals. She's also going to share practical ways to focus on steady progress rather than short bursts of effort, and the importance of knowing your energy drivers and sappers, and how to manage long periods of mental and emotional drain. Finally, we're going to explore her fresh perspective on leadership in today's evolving workplace, including how purpose-driven leadership and practices make you a better leader. So, from managing feedback to adopting that next play mindset, Elizabeth offers a wealth of practical insights for anyone looking to lead themselves and others with clarity, purpose, and resilience. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. How can someone strike the balance between taking responsibility but maintaining their confidence in the face of uncertainty or difficulty with achieving their goals?
Don't over-index on "I'm sorry." Oh, this one is so hard for me because I'm such a people pleaser at heart. But the more "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," you diminish your own confidence and you diminish the confidence of the person you're apologizing to because they don't think you're going to fix it. You're just apologizing. So if you do fall short of a goal, you own it and you articulate what elements actually went wrong. This blanket "I'm sorry" is just making everybody feel bad. Unless you did some moral failing on purpose, you really probably don't need to be saying "I'm sorry." But when you can extrapolate, I didn't make enough calls. I didn't accurately assess the risk on that. And here's why that happened and how I'm going to change it. You move from this overly apologetic state into a person who is strategic, who has accurately assessed themselves so your leader doesn't have to point out for you all the things that went wrong, and who has a plan to rectify. And that momentum versus "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry" is transformative for everyone involved.
And instead of saying you're sorry, just say thank you and provide corrective action moving forward on that basis.
Yeah, thank you for telling me. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the feedback. All of these subtle language shifts help us own our power and help the people around us see that we are someone who is competent and confident.
When with goal achievement as well, managing your energy is just as important as managing your time. What practical steps can you give people so that they can better identify those energy drivers and sappers?
So we alluded to this at the very start of our conversation, which is pay attention to what's giving you energy and prioritize that because you're going to need the momentum to carry you through things that are less than thrilling for you. So not everyone has the autonomy to lay out their month in a way that matches their energetic cycle, but you probably do have the freedom to spend 5 or 10 minutes at the start of your day that's, on something that's more exciting to you than some of your more draining to-dos. And being attuned to what gives us energy, what zaps our energy, enables us to plan more effectively. The other thing you can do, and I see this a lot in entry to mid level, is if you do have an energy drain coming up. Everyone does in their career. Maybe it's a particular project, maybe it's a meeting with a particular person. You are going to look at the periphery of that experience and ask yourself how you can modify it to help you. And by periphery, I mean, where is the meeting taking place? Who is involved? When is the meeting? When you give yourself permission to invite another high energy colleague to have a standing up meeting, to have a meeting right before you go to lunch with your friend instead of on Friday afternoon. When we modify all of the surrounding elements of this thing that is the drain in the center, we can make an inroad at improving our own emotional spirit. And we so often over index on, I have to do this thing, I hate it, instead of examining what are the things surrounding this that I can control and how can I pull those levers in a way that serves me.
You're right. We often over index on the core stuff and we need to look more at the peripheries if it's something that we can't change. And really, it's important to accept the reality. These sources emphasize the importance of accepting situations you can't change. So if you're faced with a draining task or interaction, acknowledge that it's a temporary part of your work life. Fight against the reality will only amplify that frustration and drain your energy further.
Absolutely. And again, easier said on this podcast than it is done. But the important thing is to catch yourself when you're starting to think, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And move your brain to what can I control? How can I make this better for me?
When you also suggest sometimes we just need to phone it in and not do our best in certain areas. Now, that's a real tough concept for everyone to grasp, especially leaders. But how can someone make peace with this idea, especially if they're a high achiever who equates their effort with their identity?
So, this is not a suggestion that you should care less. If you are listening to the Good Leadership podcast, you probably care a lot, and that's great for you. What I'm suggesting is that you should care more selectively. We all have more to do than we could ever get done. We all have people we want to please, goals we want to hit, dashboards we need to be green. When you over index on volume and you try and give your absolute best to everything, something's going to give and you're not going to pick it. It's probably going to be your health or it's going to be the relationships you have with your family if you're a high achiever at work. When you decide, I'm going to phone it in here, here, and here, you put yourself in control of what gives. We cannot be all things to all people in all areas of our life. So the suggestion of to phone it in is you make that decision before it's made for you. And that can be everything from a senior leader saying, I'm going to phone it in on the least strategic elements of this quarter. It could be, someone in a junior role saying, I'm going to phone it in on this part of my job that I don't really like and drains my energy. You will not be able to give your best to everything. You have to choose before the world chooses for you.
And instead of viewing it as laziness or a lack of commitment, it's really reframing it as a conscious decision, like you said, to reallocate your energy and resources to where they matter most. Because a lot of leaders fall into the trap of just, they want to be indispensable. And you say, you don't want to be indispensable, be invaluable by focusing on the tasks that leverage your unique strengths and create value for your organization.
Absolutely. The compliment of we could never do this without you is a really scary one, especially if you get it early in your career, because that is the precursor to you're going to be in this seat for a really long time. But when you tap into your strengths and you prioritize those in the areas where they matter, where they make an impact, you change the conversation. You become invaluable to your organization instead of indispensable.
And those that are indispensable, like you said, don't get moved up for promotion. I've seen this in my personal career and in colleagues that they're just too valuable in their current role, and the organization passes them over for that next job because they can't replace them.
Absolutely. It is a tempting trap, especially for high performers, because you want to be great at your job. But I would challenge everyone listening to layer on yes, you want to be great at your job, but how can you show that you're going to be great for the next one too? And that's by using your strengths to make a maximum impact in your organization. And to do that, you're going to have to phone it in on the less strategic elements.
Well, and this really speaks to that balancing the work and life, and trying to get that work-life balance, especially during these transitional life seasons. I love how you say it. It's our 9 to 5 sometimes is not as important as our 5 to 9, depending on the season of life we're in. How can someone navigate this balance without feeling guilty or uncommitted at work?
Oh, the shareholders are screaming. What do you mean work is not the most important thing every moment of your life? But let's be serious. I mean, your tombstone is not going to read exceeds expectation, delivers value to shareholders. And that's hard to come to grips with if you're a top performer and you've really tied your identity to being valuable at work and making a real impact there. But giving yourself permission to phone it in sometimes in some seasons of life in a big way at work is a freeing realization. And again, it's better you make that decision than the decision is made for you. If you have an ill parent, a new baby, some personal crisis, look back or try to think if you look back 20 years down the road, what would you want to have done, right? Does it really matter that much? And again, It's challenging when so much of our professional identity, especially in the US, is related to work success. But when we temporarily separate ourselves from our performance review and look at the longer trajectory of our life, we open the door for more intentionality. And you can do it all, just not at the same time.
Third part is working with other people. So, no matter how strong your mindset or behavior is, the workplace dynamics created by other people can significantly influence your success. So, you got to navigate these relationships successfully, manage expectations, and foster more collaboration, which are all vital components of self leadership. I'd like to start with your critique of that traditional servant leadership model. And you suggest it no longer fits today's less hierarchical workplaces. Instead, you advocate for a more purpose driven leadership mindset.
Absolutely. Servant driven or servant leadership was an important stepping stone in leadership, right? We moved from command and control, this you do it because I said so and I'm in charge, into how can I, as a leader, serve you? The challenge is in today's environment, and servant leadership was originally coined 20, maybe even 30 years ago. In today's environment, organizations are wider than they are taller. So we're not quite sure who's serving who around here. The rate of change is exponential. So, what does it mean to serve you today versus what does it mean to serve you tomorrow? And we are also putting more emphasis on the individual employee. So, this conversation, which is a good one around employee engagement and fulfillment, it's leaving leaders feeling like, okay, like employees, you do some of the lifting too, right? I'm not your servant for all of the time being. Leaders are often overwhelmed with their teams. They have 11, 15 direct reports sometimes. How can you be a servant to that many people? You can't. So what I suggest is purpose-driven leadership, and you can embody this on either side of the equation, whether you are the boss or whether you are the employee. The more you calibrate with your leader to a shared purpose, the thing you're both working towards, the more energy you have. Sometimes it's going to be you serving them. They're your leader. That's natural. Sometimes they're going to be serving you. But at the core is this shared impact that you've both agreed on. So we have something to focus on versus, am I helping you or are you helping me? And both of us are disappointed at the end of that equation. So I think in the environment we're in, one of urgency, one of rapid change, one of burnout, purpose driven leadership is a more sustainable solution.
And by focusing on that shared purpose and open communication, employees and bosses can create this more collaborative, fulfilling work relationship that benefits not only them, right, but the organization as a whole. Another piece of it is organizations really want to hear that dissent. They want to make sure people feel heard and that they can disagree. And I love the Amazon mindset of disagree and commit practice that encourages leaders to voice concerns, but ultimately commit to decisions. How can employees really adopt this mindset in their organizations where open disagreement might not be encouraged?
I love that Amazon principle because it captures two really important elements. And often we only get one of them right. We either voice our disagreement and then become a stubborn fuss when it doesn't go our way, or we blindly commit because we tell ourselves we're not in charge and it's not our decision to make, so whatever. Both of those options are bad. When you disagree and commit, when you actively voice your concerns, and we'll get into some language to do this without seeming like a whiny baby, when you actively voice your concerns and you commit to the team anyway, you position yourself much stronger because you're not someone who blindly takes direction. Having said that, you're still a team player. So the language you want to use is invitational and validating that you are a team player. Things like, because I care about this outcome, based on my role, because I want to see our team successful. My concern is X, Y, and Z. You phrase it more as a question. You again validate your intent is not to diminish the decision, but to understand it, offer an alternative perspective. And then you sandwich that with, if this decision moves forward, know that I am in full commitment. And what that does is it safeguards you to some degree against, you didn't want to do this, blah, 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 blah. But it also positions you as someone who's actively thinking and who cares about this organization and wants it to be successful versus someone who blindly takes the direction because, oh, it's not my decision to make.
Because not every disagreement warrants a full blown debate. Really, what we're trying to get here is the goal is to offer valuable input, can contribute to the team's success, even when you fully don't agree with that chosen path. For leaders looking at their perspective in this, How can leaders ensure that the disagree phase is robust and inclusive? Because it's usually, from my experience especially, dominated by a few voices or avoided entirely.
That's a great question. From a leadership perspective, it is crucial to invite disagreement. And the most effective way to do that is to be really clear that you're inviting disagreement. If you want people to poke holes, to offer alternatives, to provide their opinions, ask for it. You can't be dependent on people's confidence. Maybe they worked for a really terrible leader in the past and they're afraid to speak up. Be really clear about the type of feedback you're looking for, when that feedback phase is done, and what you will do with the feedback. Again, it doesn't mean that you're not making the decision. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be right and you have to change your mind. But be explicit about the need for feedback and the willingness to disagree.
And by fostering a culture of open communication, respect, constructive conflict, leaders really can ensure that that disagree phase is robust and inclusive, which ultimately, right, leads to better decision making in the overall process. Another area that leaders really struggle with is managing feedback. They don't like it, they avoid it, or they just wait till it gets really bad and they do it very poorly. You have three parts of managing effective feedback, and that's the timing, the strength, and the scope. So perhaps you can unpack each to give leaders some insight into how to manage feedback more appropriately.
When you're asking for feedback, whether you're the CEO, whether this is your first job and you're talking to your boss about your project, when you are asking for feedback, you want to be mindful of the timing that you are asking. You don't want to wait until everything is all buttoned up to ask for feedback. You're going to be seeking it at those interim junctures when you're less emotionally attached to your picture perfect project. You're going to be mindful of the strength of the person you're asking. No one should ever ask me to proofread anything because I'll do a terrible job. The same can be said for different traits of all of your colleagues and even your boss. Really think about what the person you're asking for feedback from, what they're good at, and how they can be of most service to you. You also want to consider the scope. Throwing a massive proposal at someone and saying, "Hey, I'd love your feedback," that is a recipe for disaster. They don't know, do you want them to rewrite it? Are you trying to get feedback on the font? Are you trying to get feedback on the terms and conditions? Like, where are we going here? When you are asking for feedback, no matter what seat you're in, it is your job to point the person you are asking and say, "I'd like your feedback on the opening section of this. I'd like your feedback on the timeline I've laid out. I'd like your feedback on, the stakeholders I've identified. Am I missing anybody?" The more you can get someone to weigh in on something that they are good at on a defined scope at the moment you need it, the more likely you are to get good feedback. The risk of not doing that is you either get someone completely rewriting your thing at the final hour, or you get some blanket, "Oh, looks great," because the person doesn't have the time to go through it thoroughly and they don't know what you're looking for.
You also encourage looking behind the feedback to uncover deeper insights. What are some practical questions or techniques someone could use to understand the why behind the feedback they receive?
Oftentimes, we get feedback that we immediately dismiss as false, and we don't seek to understand the why behind it. This is even more commonly the case with poorly presented feedback. So, some questions you can ask before you decide whether you dismiss it, which is always your right, is, can you give me an example? What prompted your thinking on that? Is this a repeated theme? Those questions where you're kind of peeling back the onion on, okay, you said this wasn't strategic. What does that really mean? What's beneath that? What made you jump to those words? And what you're hoping to articulate is the thought process and the experience that led to that punchline. You're working backwards because then when you understand the full rationale, you can actually act versus someone throwing around, it's not clear. What does that mean? The more you can push and see the feedback behind the feedback and unpack what made them say that, the more likely you are to accurately assess, do I want to move on this or not?
And you're not required to move on the feedback. You can just say thank you to the feedback, like what Marshall Goldsmith has said to me in the past, and just then you consider whether it's something that you want to act upon or not. But by saying thank you, by listening intently, you give them that validation that what they gave you is important to you, and you'll determine whether or not to act on it or not, and not to kind of just spend too much time ruminating on it, especially if it's something that's that you're worried about a failure or a success. because you have a great philosophy from Coach K in the book that says next play. So you acknowledge where successes or failures occurred. You don't dwell on them. You just move to that next play. How can professionals apply this mindset to their daily work?
This is phraseology that I first heard inside of LinkedIn, who I've done a lot of work with as an instructor and as a consultant. And the sentiment of next play is you are always operating with the next move in mind. We are often tempted, especially when we're busy, especially when we're tired, which a lot of us are now, to sit in the present, say, oh, this isn't working. Oh, that worked. This didn't work. I want to do that. But when you shift your thinking and you examine what's next for me, what's my next play, how is this moment that I'm experiencing, good, bad, and different, going to springboard me into the next one? You open the door for more opportunities. And again, it's easier to say on this podcast than it is to actually execute. But considering, this moment, whether it's a painful piece of feedback, whether it's a failure of a product, whether things are going pretty good and people are looking at me for promotion, what is my next step, regardless of what your organization says is next in your org chart, regardless of the path that you believe you have to take based on what your parents told you, whatever it is for you. What is your next play? That gives you a place to land this energy.
Because reflection is important. And I would argue that a lot of leaders are in execute mode all the time. They don't spend any time in reflecting and learning from their past mistakes, but they also need to move forward. What are some practical tips that you have for striking that balance between learning from past experiences, but focusing on what's next?
It really is so situational, and different people have different tendencies, right? Some of us live constantly in the future, anticipating, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And some of us live in reflection mode, constantly assessing everything that's happening, missing what is right in front of us. So, we started this conversation talking about mindset and being hyper aware of your habits, your beliefs, your assumptions, and how those show up for you at work. And I think that plays into next play as well, being aware of your own tendencies, whether it's over indexing on ruminating on these failures or whether it's constantly saying, what's next, what's next, what's next. Whatever that is for you, it's on you to find the balance. And that's going to look different for every person. But what's helpful for me is to hold in parallel both appreciation and learning for the present, while also considering, how am I going to use this in the future and what do I do with this?
Let's move just to new managers, and maybe this is really for all managers or leaders, but for someone new to managing expectations. What's a simple framework or process that you can use to define and communicate your expectations effectively? Because I find for new leaders, it's feedback and expectations are two of the big ones that they normally struggle with.
So there's some things the leader can do, and you've covered it in some of your previous episodes. There's also things the individual employee can do. If you are not getting expectations clearly defined for you, raise your hand and ask for them. Don't just sit around and say, I wish my boss would be more clear about the expectations, right? You can ask for who, why, what, when. Those are things within your control. From a leadership perspective, defining clear expectations is the root, and you said it, of so many performance challenges. We often don't define the expectations that are gauzier. This, is it okay to answer after hour emails? What level of responsiveness do we expect? How do we disagree in a meeting? We talk about timelines and not how we're going to do it. So the more you can answer those fuzzy questions, the more you minimize the risk for people's feelings being hurt, for people not fulfilling expectations that you assume they believe. And again, you can kind of do this in any seat. We put a lot of weight on the leader to define these perfectly clear expectations, but employees have the ability to ask questions, and a good leader will be receptive to that.
And really, even looking at it in terms of identifying those key areas, like you mentioned, be specific and measurable and don't assume anything. You don't assume mind reading if you're the leader to say they should have known this, or if you're not the leader and you're an employee, then just be brave enough, have enough courage of, 20 seconds of insane courage just to say, give me that feedback that I need. Explain to me what the expectations are on this project. It's going to save you so much time, energy, and going to put you in a much better position later, because I find as a leader, if people were to ask me more initially, that saves a lot of time on the back end, and I really appreciate it.
And sometimes your boss doesn't know what they're looking for until you ask. And you can be a great employee by prompting that conversation. You save everybody so much time and heartache in the long run.
Speaking of negativity and that negativity cycle, that really, these days, with everyone on burnout, overwhelmed, it has an impact on morale. What are some practical steps that you can give leaders or just people listening to this episode to break out of this cycle and really safeguard their mental energy in a very challenging workplace in today's society, which many people are experiencing a tremendous amount of burnout and mental fatigue and other mental issues?
I could give you a lot of techniques you've probably seen in other articles, right? Cold showers, don't look at your phone before bed, make sure you have healthy boundaries, touch the grass, see the sun. I'll tell you something you can do inside of your workday that doesn't equate to working less or some of these health practices. Tap into the meaning of your work. That is going to fill your cup. Seeing that your work makes a difference is so important for your energy. And you don't need to wait for your boss or HR to show you that your work matters. You can do it by exploring your ripple effect, asking for feedback, and considering what would happen if you suddenly stop doing all of these things. Next, you consider what your next play is. We got to have somewhere for this energy to land. When there's nothing to look forward to, we feel so empty. And lastly, we're going to identify what is and isn't in our control. When we zoom in on what is in control, all these crazy things with AI, with the economy, with our organization's changes, we feel tired and we feel powerless. When we focus on what is in our control, we feel empowered, we feel motivated. So those three things, articulating your ripple effect, finding that meaning, knowing I'm going to make a next play, something is beyond this for me, and here's what I can control. Those three things can change your work experience and decrease your level of burnout. Even if you don't have time to, meditate, stare at a red light, all these other holistic practices that are good but tiring.
Because if someone is really stuck in their current role or uninspired, I mean, focusing, reflecting on your past successes too helps out to make sure that you can recall that positive feedback and maybe seek external input if you're really kind of depressed on this and what's really driving or sapping your energy like we've talked about before. If you can't change the core, focus on the peripheries.
Absolutely. And I think telling yourself, and we all fall into this trap, it's a season, right? This moment in your career, if you feel bad, if you feel burnt out, if you feel like 2/3 of Glassdoor respondents do stuck at work, it is a season. It doesn't mean it's not painful, but it's temporary and you have the power to change it.
Before we wrap up today, Elizabeth, is there one call to action that you'd like to give people listening to this call to lead more effectively moving forward based on what we've talked about in this episode?
Zoom in on what you can control and put some guardrails up around what you can't. Nothing is going to go perfectly, but when we empower ourselves to control the controllable, we give all that energy and anxiety and restlessness a place to land. We step into our full potential.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
You can learn more about me at elizabethlotardo.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I have a ton of LinkedIn learning courses, and my new book, Leading Yourself, is available everywhere books are sold.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining me. And thank all of you for joining me again on this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. Remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference. I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.